In a split second, a moment of pride and arrogance shatters a group of officers' lives forever. They strike what they think is just another black man, but they couldn't be more wrong. What happens next will leave them questioning everything as justice, in its most powerful form, returns in a way no one could have imagined. The streets of the city had always been a place of tension that simmered just beneath the surface, waiting for the smallest spark to set it off. Officer Carl Harris, a veteran cop with a reputation for arrogance, walked through the downtown area with a swagger that he believed was earned. His partner, Officer Todd Carter, kept pace beside him, a younger cop eager to prove himself but still learning the ropes. Together, they had made a name for themselves in the precinct, a name that carried both respect and fear. They were quick to assert their authority, quick to make judgments, and even quicker to pull rank. Today, however, would be a day that changed everything. The two officers were patrolling the busy streets when they spotted him. A man walking down the sidewalk, his presence calm but unassuming. He was tall, with broad shoulders, dressed simply in a hoodie and jeans. But it was his face, his calm, unwavering gaze, that caught the officer's attention. He wasn't doing anything wrong, but the officer's instincts, fueled by bias and years of unchecked power, told them otherwise. This man, like so many others before him, had to be dealt with, had to be taught a lesson in respect. They weren't sure why, but they assumed he would resist. They assumed he was up to no good. In their minds, he was just another black man who needed to be put in his place. Without hesitation, Officer Harris approached him, his words sharp and commanding, as if trying to assert dominance over the situation. "What are you doing here?" he barked, his voice laced with authority. The man who was calmly walking paused and met the officer's gaze with an even, calm stare. There was no fear, no sign of aggression, just a quiet sense of confidence that seemed to unsettle the officers even more. "Just walking," the man responded, his voice low and steady. But that answer wasn't enough. Harris, already inflamed by his own superiority complex, couldn't stand the man's calmness. "You think you can just walk around here without answering any questions? You think you're above the law?" Harris's hand shot out, grabbing the man's arm with force. For a moment, the man stood there, motionless. His expression never changed, and his eyes never wavered. But then Harris, overcome with the need to assert control, raised his hand and struck the man across the face with a harsh slap. The sound of skin meeting skin echoed in the quiet street, and the crowd that had started to gather gasped in shock. The slap was a symbol of the unchecked power that many police officers held over marginalized communities. It was a symbol of years of abuse, of systemic injustice, of a broken system that allowed arrogance and bias to go unchecked. But what the officers didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that this slap was the catalyst for their undoing. The man, whom they had seen as just another target, was no ordinary person. His name was Michael Thompson, and his calm demeanor concealed something far deeper. He wasn't just a bystander. He was a former officer, a man who had once worn the same uniform that Harris and Carter wore, a man who had dedicated his life to law enforcement, only to be betrayed by the very system he had worked to protect. Michael had walked away from the force years ago, disillusioned by the corruption, the racism, and the abuse he had witnessed behind closed doors. But now he was back, and he wasn't going to let these officers get away with their actions. After the slap, Michael didn't react with violence or anger. Instead, he stood still, his gaze unwavering. He could feel the anger bubbling inside him, but he controlled it, knowing that today was about justice, not revenge. As the officers continued to shout at him, trying to provoke a reaction, Michael turned slowly, his eyes meeting Harris's. "I'm not the man you think I am," Michael said, his voice calm but filled with an undeniable power. He turned and walked away, but not before Harris and Carter could feel the weight of the situation settling in. They had crossed a line, but they had no idea just how far they had pushed things. Later that day, Michael returned, this time in full uniform, his badge gleaming in the sunlight. He walked into the precinct where the officers worked, the same precinct that had once been his home. He wasn't there to cause chaos or destruction. He was there to make sure they understood the true consequences of their actions. As he entered, the entire building seemed to freeze. The officers, who had once laughed and joked about their superiority, were now silent. The reality of what had happened was setting in. They were face to face with someone who had once been like them, someone who had been betrayed by the system they had so blindly upheld. Michael approached the chief's office, where Harris and Carter had been summoned. The chief looked up, startled to see Michael standing there, his uniform unmistakable. Harris's stomach dropped as he saw the man from earlier now standing in front of him, not as a target, but as a force that commanded respect. "I think it's time we have a conversation," Michael said, quietly, his words laced with authority. Within minutes, the chief called a meeting, and the officers were forced to confront Michael's presence. But Michael wasn't there to argue. He wasn't there to fight. He was there to make them understand that their actions had consequences, that no one, no matter their badge or the color of their skin, was above the law. The hours that followed were tense. Harris and Carter were grilled by internal affairs, forced to answer for their actions in front of a room full of people who had long been silent about the abuse they had witnessed. As the investigation unfolded, the truth came to light. It wasn't just the slap that was shocking, it was the systematic abuse that had been perpetuated by Harris Carter and many others in the precinct. The power dynamic that had existed for so long was crumbling. By the end of the day, Harris and Carter were placed on administrative leave, their careers hanging by a thread. Michael Thompson, the man they had so callously disrespected, had turned the tide. He wasn't just a victim, he was a force of change, one that had shattered the false sense of security that had long shielded these officers from accountability. And as Michael walked out of the precinct, he felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. The system may have been broken, but it wasn't beyond repair. Today, he had taken the first step in restoring justice, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been mistreated by those who thought they were above it all. Want to see how justice prevails in the face of corruption and abuse? Stay tuned for more stories that reveal the true power of accountability. Subscribe to expect stories for more powerful tales of change and justice.